Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pradibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitaamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambattvamanusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim. Namostute Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharatatayala Purnaha Prajwalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Stotra Vetraikapanaye Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha. Sarvopanishado Gavo Dokta Gopalanandanaha Partho Vatsya Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanura Mardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshware Namaha. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We're continuing in chapter 12, Bhakti Yoga. And naturally, Krishna has been talking about devotion, and he's been talking about its various levels, which depend on the degree of the subtlety in the mind of the seeker. That's why if you ask 100 people what bhakti is, you'll get 100 answers. One thing is sure though, all seekers ultimately have to cultivate a mind that can accept God as both with and without form. In the last class, Krishna's point was that the latter, in other words, devotion for the formless absolute, is much more difficult to practice. That increased difficulty is not just a mere fluke. It comes from the fact that most people are not ready from that path, not ready for that path. Can we imagine a kind of spirituality where we don't meditate on Amma's form? There's no archana, no mantra japa, no puja. These are our spiritual sustenance right now. So we cannot imagine such a thing. Not only that, it took great effort for us to train our mind to do these things in the first place and to come to appreciate them. And that is precisely the point. Our mind started off interested in other things, in worldly things. So long as the mind is preoccupied with material, physical, and external things, there will be a lot of static taking away from our ability to concentrate. It's like trying to listen to a song on a radio that is not tuned properly to that channel. The mind is halfway between the channels of materialism and spirituality. So it makes it hard for us to focus on either one fully. This is exactly how I felt before I joined the ashram when I was living in Japan. It was very difficult for me to do my job properly. I was working for the Japanese government then. It was hard for me to do that job properly. And I also couldn't focus entirely on Amma. It was a very painful kind of life. So that was one catalyst for my abandoning it. But this is why the first step is considered to be Antakarana Shuddhigaranam, which means purification of the inner organs, particularly the mind. That purification is a process of replacing negative tendencies with positive ones that create new habits that facilitate our spiritual growth rather than deter it. As the worldly and materialistic desires gradually dissipate, our mind can finally start to perceive a baseline of silence and stillness within us, which until now had been drowned out by the deafening cry of countless desires seeking our attention. Just imagine having 1,000,000 3-year-old kids in the household, and you're trying to meditate. It's like that. All of our desires are immature, selfish thoughts, just like little kids, but they won't allow you to have any peace. So, as that stillness becomes deeper and deeper, we come to perceive that it is our own essence and that of God too. Just abiding in that place of utter tranquility is a powerful sadhana, a profound devotional practice that touches us in a way that we never experienced before. In some ways, all the bhajans we sing, no matter how loud they may become, are just to experience that inner silence we feel afterwards. It's like the silence we feel after we chant Om. It's still devotion, or what we are calling upasana here, but it's not so much about a form, it's a feeling, it's a state of being. And that is when we start to feel drawn towards worship of the non-dual, of the formless God. Now, Lalita Sahasranama is definitely a devotional text, and we chant it with a lot of devotion every day. But when I look at it, I see it as it's orchestrated to guide us from the form to the formless. The first 90 mantras or so are mostly about the form of Devi. But slowly they interject these non-dual kind of imagery. So verse 137, Om Nirakaraye Namaha, she who is without form. Verse 154, Om Nirupadhyaye Namaha, she who is not conditioned or has no limitations. There are many verses like that. She who is consciousness itself, she who has no name or form, she who is free from all limitations, she who is devoid of the 3 gunas, the 3 qualities, sattva, rajas, and tamas. If she doesn't have those qualities, it means that she's not manifest in this world. She's beyond. And then she who has forms. Which one is she? She's both. Because the next, after that verse that says she who has forms, the next verse is she who has no definite form. It's confusing, but the point is that she's beyond. She can have a form, she can not have a form. She's beyond this universe. Because she exists even at the time of dissolution. That's why there's a mantra, Om Maha Pralaya Sakshinye Namaha, which means I bow down to she who is the one who witnesses the grand dissolution of this entire universe. So these verses help us to understand the progression of our devotion. This bhakti for the absolute, the formless absolute, is what Lord Krishna talked about in verses 3 to 5. But he was omniscient, so he knew that Arjuna was not suited for that kind of devotion. So attributeless supreme, and neither are we. We're not qualified either. So Krishna gave a second option, which was Vishwarupa Bhakti, which means devotion for the universal form. And that was covered in verses 6 to 8. The scriptures, on the whole, say that this kind of worship cannot directly lead to liberation because it's relying on some kind of form, right? Even the universe, it's a form of sorts. It's material. But that's still a whole lot better than getting confused and frustrated and giving up on spirituality, because meditating on the formless is really only for certain people who have that capacity. So worshipping a universal form, you're allowing a form, but that is needed for, at least some kind of form is needed for almost everybody. Like last week I talked about, cases where people just abandoned spirituality altogether because they were frustrated with their attempts to meditate on the formless absolute. So this meditation on the formless absolute is definitely difficult, but anything can become possible with preparation. I can share an example. I had a surgery a few years, about 10 years ago. It was an appendectomy. After that, it was a kind of a risky surgery. Actually, it ruptured. Amma said that I was probably supposed to die at that time. And she said, "Oh, divine grace," as though she had nothing to do with it. Right? I knew it was her grace only. But after the surgery, I couldn't sit up. It was so painful. And the nurses, I asked them to help me, get up. And they said, "No, you have to do it yourself." I thought these people are so cruel. And she said, "No, because only if you practice doing all these things that you used to be able to do easily, if you don't practice those, your recovery will be very, very slow." So they made me stand up. They made me walk around. It was so painful, but they were doing it out from my good. And that practice actually enabled me to recover quickly, just like they said. So we have to make effort, and that effort makes the progress faster and easier. So anything difficult can be made easier through repeated practice. Just look at the Olympic athletes. How do they do all those fantastic feats? Not by like half an hour of practice every day. This, who's the American gymnast, very short, Simone something, Biles or something. I was curious because she won all those gold medals. How much does she practice? 8 hours a day. 8 hours a day. That's not on a computer 8 hours. That's running around and exerting yourself for 8 hours a day. For years. So that, and then she makes it look so simple. Well, duh, she's practicing. So that practice, that process of practicing is what we're going to hear from Lord Krishna tonight. And we'll start with verse 9. We'll put a slide on the screen and you can join in the chanting of the verse. I will read the verse very slowly and you can repeat after me. Verse 9. Atachittam samadatum na shaknoshi mayi stiram abhyasa yogena tato mamichaptum dhananjaya. The meaning is, if you cannot fix your mind steadily on me, then seek to reach me through Abhyasa Yoga, which means repeated practice, or Dhananjaya. So one commentator here adds this explanation, which I really like. Through constant practice, the mind has to be weaned from the world. So it means that we're addicted to the world, basically. This yoga of constant practice must continue until the mind is permanently reclaimed from impurity. That means we're immersed in impurity. Impurity, basically, Amma has said, is anything that takes us away from God. So we mistake the world for something precious and then put spirituality on a lower priority level. And so that's why we go away from God. But he's saying we have to reclaim the mind from that lifestyle. The impossible can be made possible through constant practice. Now that reminded me of a story I read about the great violinist Itzhak Perlman. I don't know if he's well known these days, but he's an amazing violinist. And after one of his concerts, one of the audience people came up to him and said, "You are an absolute genius." And after he was humble about it, and then the guy left, and he turned to the person next to him and he says, "I practiced 10 hours a day for 40 years, and he calls me a genius." That's not, he's a genius maybe from our standpoint, but 10 hours a day, for 40 years, that's not mere genius. It shows that he earned it, right? So we also have to consider that level of commitment. You know, he has that much commitment to violin. Just imagine if he did that for God realization. He would have been realized for sure. So this verse represents a third option. So first option was worship or meditation on the formless absolute. Second option was the universal form, and this is the third one. Because let's face it, you know, if someone says to all of us, meditate on the universal form and don't think of anything else, how long can we do it? So what does the me mean here, right? He says, if you cannot fix your mind steadily on me. Well, Shankaracharya says it means the Vishwarupa, the universal form, right? So he says, seek to reach me through this. In other words, practice, and then you can reach me in the universal form. He's not talking about moksha yet, because it says in the scriptures that through any form you cannot directly attain moksha, so we don't expect that. We expect to reach at least the universal form. So anyhow, this is much more difficult than what most of us do now. Just to practice over and over again, to put our mind, fix our mind on a form and do that incessantly. Because, let's face it, we don't have love for the entire universe. You need love to focus your mind on something. So if it's Amma's form, we can focus for a longer period of time because we have love for her. So we won't get the same kind of concentration or fix our mind steadily, as he says, on a universal form. So probably Arjuna was also not ready for that universal form meditation. Otherwise, Krishna wouldn't have offered this additional option. So the yoga of repeated practice sounds pretty doable, right? Repeated practice. Okay, I've practiced something before. But what does it mean? I'll give you explanations from different people because there's not one explanation for these things. And I think different commentaries will touch different people's hearts in different ways. So I'm trying to introduce you to a variety of commentaries, including Amma's. Shankaracharya says, Abhyasa, which just means practice, means fixing the mind on a single object after withdrawing it from all else. Yoga is Abhyasa Yoga. It's got both words. Yoga means the concentration resulting from such efforts. I find it interesting that he talks about Abhyasa, fixing the mind on an object, after withdrawing it from all else. Those of you who have studied yoga or Yoga Sutras or the 8 steps of Ashtanga Yoga, you might remember that number 5 is pratyahara, which means sense withdrawal. So very similar to what Krishna says, what Shankaracharya says in his commentary. And the next step, which is fixing your mind, is much like dharana, right? So it has some parallel similarities with the Ashtanga Yoga up to that point, not all the way. The philosophy is a little bit different, so we should remember that. But it's following the Yoga Sutras follows the Bhagavad Gita, not the other way around. And as always, Amma explains the same thing in a way that is easier for us to understand. She says, a minimum of 3 years is required in learning how to fix one's attention firmly on the form of meditation within. Initially, one must strive for concentration by looking at a photo. If one meditates with closed eyes for 10 minutes, then for 10 minutes one should look at the form of meditation. Eventually, the form will become clear within. So a lot of the spiritual practices that Amma recommends are precisely that, Abhyasa Yoga, the yoga of constant practice. So Manasa Puja, mental worship, Mantra Japa, all these things are pretty much the same thing, helping us extend our ability to concentrate. And it also means that Amma is allowing us to use symbols of the universal form. So I remember that really fateful day in 1992 when Amma left Japan. Some of you may have heard me talk about it, but when I realized that Amma was leaving the country and I was staying in Japan, I just collapsed and was crying on the floor. I just couldn't even stand up. And Amma came over, and all she did, she hugged me and she whispered in my ear, and then she gave me a picture of her meditating. And that picture was like my lifeline, from then on, because it was like a symbol for everything that mattered to me in life. So like that, a symbol is not only acceptable, but it can be very helpful for us. It's like a photo or a statue or whatever you connect with devotionally. And that's what is meant by Ishta Devada, your beloved deity. If you received a mantra from Amma, you would know she asks you, what is your beloved deity? So that photo or that deity, whatever image it is for you, it could be light, it could be nature, whatever it is. It's a symbol for something that our mind is not yet able to grasp. Because what we really want is something that is beyond all name and form. Liberation is beyond name and form, so it has to be that. But for now, we can consider it kind of like the training wheels on our bike, so that we don't fall down in our attempts to progress on the spiritual path. Then there's another, perhaps more simple method proposed by Jnanadev. I'll be quoting him quite a bit during this class. Jnanadev lived about 500 years ago in Maharashtra. He's a great saint. You can read about him. He says, if you are not able to fix both your mind and intellect on me, then dedicate them to me for at least one moment every 3 hours. During those moments, you will feel devotion instead of the yearning for sense objects. So I read this commentary for the first time in a long while. So I immediately set a repeating alarm on my phone, just so I wanted to practice that, because it's such a beautiful concept that he says, if you can't do it all the time, just once every 3 hours, just think of me, right? So we can think of Amma that way. And Amma has so many things to say about concentration. I mean, I could just go on forever, but I'm going to share one quote and then a story also, kind of a depiction of how she was doing it way back when, even before I met her. She says about mantra, concentration will not come easily in the beginning. Therefore, move your lips while chanting. Eventually, you will be able to chant in your mind without moving your lips and tongue. Do japa with alertness, never mechanically. Each mantra should taste like chocolate. Can you do that? It's not easy, right? In the end, we will reach a state where even if we let go of the mantra, it won't let go of us. That is beautiful. Then the story is, it was meditation, evening meditation time. And this is how it goes. It was 4:30 to 6 p.m. that the people meditated. This is back in the early 80s. And the brahmacharis came in. There were a few women also, but very few. Sat in their respective places and started meditating. Amma was there too. She meditated with them like now she's doing every day there. But there were like maybe 15 people there at that time in a very small room. So Amma closely observed them both internally and externally. By calling their names, Amma made people alert when their concentration decreased. To some, she said, "You're losing concentration on your form of meditation." Then to another, she said, "Be alert." And then she would throw little pebbles at them to bring back their attention. After throwing a pebble at one brahmachari, Amma warned, "You're thinking about something else. Open your eyes and repeat your mantra." So now you want Amma to come in your bedroom and meditate with you and throw pebbles at you? I think one day we could deal with it. Every day. This is an hour and a half, right? They did it for 8 hours a day back then. So, and we would all have like bruises all over our face from big dirt clods she would have to throw at us, right? So, of course, the real goal is to see the whole universe as Amma. But the personal deity leads us to the universal deity, and the universal deity leads us to the formless absolute, according to Shankaracharya. So all this sounds very exciting, enticing, but maybe we should have a little reality check before we sign up for it full time. There will be days when our minds just won't cooperate at all, and making all kinds of visualization difficult. Definitely that must have been the case with Arjuna. He was a prince, a warrior, so a lot of energy and what we call rajas, that active energy. So Krishna in his omniscience offers yet another easier option, which will be in verse 10. Abhyase pyasamartosi matkarma paramo bhava madartham api karmani kurvan siddhim avapsyasi. Sometimes I take some little liberties in changing the wording, so here I'm doing so. If also you are unable to practice this yoga, it says practice abhyasa, but that means practice. So it's more like if you are also unable to practice this, be intent to work for me. Our text says, this is the Amrita Puri Bhagavad Gita. I'm going to give you a couple of other options to understand that. Be intent on my work. Be intent on doing actions for my sake. Even by doing actions for my sake, you shall attain perfection. So this is the fourth option out of a total of 5. So one commentator says here, it's very helpful, it kind of puts things into perspective. Force of habit is too strong to be altered or curbed. But even such a disposition can be turned to advantage. While the tendency is allowed to have its sway, it is utilized in the service of God. And he gives a couple of examples. A talkative person, for example, may go on talking of God instead of worldly things. Is he thinking about me, maybe? I don't know. An active person may work hard for the glory of God, not for the glory of wealth. When he becomes an instrument in the hands of God, no work taints him. His mind gradually becomes purified and he reaches God. So there's a funny story about something like this where, somebody prayed to Amma to become a instrument in her hands. And actually, I mean, it's a cute story and it has a moral to it also. So I think some of you would know Japanese Viveka, and this was a long time ago when he was relatively new to Amma, but his devotion to her was just really getting stronger at that time. So it was the last day of the last program in America when Amma still had, I think it was the last time she had a retreat in Bryant College in Rhode Island. So he asked me how to tell Amma, Amma, please make me a tool in your hands, or please make me into an instrument in your hands. And I told him my best, attempt at putting that in Malayalam. He tried to practice it, but I mean, he didn't know much Malayalam then, and it was just so hard for him. So he wrote it on his hand, on the palm of his hand, in Japanese letters, so he could pronounce it when he went up for his darshan. So when he got up, for his darshan, he was so moved because he's asking Amma to just take his whole life and make it an instrument in her hands. And he was so nervous that he started sweating, right? And so when he was sweating, the inside of his palm started getting watery, and then he was struggling to read the letters when it was his turn to get a darshan. And as he was struggling to read the words on his hand, Amma suddenly grabbed his glasses, because he has really thick glasses. He just took his glasses off his head, and there was no way that he could read it then. So he just started crying, and then she hugged him. So I thought, I was there watching, and I said, okay, mission accomplished, because you had to surrender when she did that. So anyhow, you had your plan, and you had to surrender to her plan. When you can surrender to Amma's plan rather than enforce your own, that means that's when we become an instrument in her hands. Remaining an instrument is the hard part. So Shankaracharya says here that it's our inner weakness that renders us unable to make repeated efforts. So as an alternative, he says, devote yourself to my work. Make that the main thing for you. So the previous step was repeated practice, right? And he's saying, but if you don't have the inner strength, you need something else. And he said, devote yourself to my work. It has to be my work. We're going to get into what that means. And just make that your main focus. Jnanadev says here, continue to be what you are. Just don't say, I'm doing this, whether it's thought, speech, or action. And then I love this last part he adds, does the chariot ever worry if the road is straight or crooked? Sometimes he speaks cryptically, Does the chariot ever worry if the road is straight or crooked? No, of course. What does the chariot care? Why? Because the charioteer has the reins and he's telling him where to go. So the chariot has nothing to worry about. He just has to surrender to the charioteer. So if we consider ourselves the chariot and Amma is sitting in our heart, she's guiding. What do I have to worry about? As long as she's guiding me, then I have to surrender and walk that course. So one important question remains though, why does our mind get restless? Even when we want to surrender to God, it sometimes resists. And the answer is that it's rajas. Rajas is that active energy that I spoke about. It's the thing that makes us get hyperactive. It makes us restless. It's behind anger. It's behind desire. A lot of these qualities that we don't want and we're trying to get rid of. But if that rajas energy doesn't find an avenue to express itself on the physical level, that doesn't mean it goes away. It's still there, and it finds another way. Just like water will find a hole to leak through, this time it'll manifest on the mental level, because it's not going away, for sure. So that's why when we close our eyes, the mind is like, no, I'm going to think about all these things, because we stopped the physical activity. And it was like, that was like the pacifier for the rajas, that we were moving around, but now you took away the pacifier, so he's going to throw a tantrum in your mind. So what we need for meditation is sattva guna. Sattva guna is that pure spiritual energy, basically. That's all we can say. It's balanced energy, pure and very subtle energy. So that's what we need to increase in order to meditate on Amma's form, even to do what she's saying, what Krishna is saying here, do God's work. Because it means all these things mean we have to withdraw our mind away from all the worldly activities and desires. So the more prevalent rajas becomes, And when it overpowers sattva, the mind becomes extrovert, even if we're sitting and meditating. And we know we've all experienced it. And the third quality, these are the gunas we're talking about, right? In American parlance, we would say guna, right? But it's guna. Same thing, different accent. So the last of the three gunas is tamas. A lot of you already know this. And when tamas overpowers everything else, you have a deep meditation. Very deep. And you may even think you're meditating. So, that's the problem. So, sattva has to be strongest, at least at that time. If the mind doesn't allow us to sit still and meditate, then we need a recommendation like Krishna is giving us here. So this is for you, for all of us when we feel restless. We can temporarily or off and on allow that rajas to be exhausted through activity, but not selfish activity, right? Do something that is either neutral or something that is good for society. And some people can make their whole life like that. You know, if you have the ability, if you have the time and the energy, perhaps later on in life people, you know, they're looking for things to do for like a second chapter to their life. Well, dedicate your life to God, you know. That's what a lot of people are doing in Amma's ashrams around the world. And they spend all their time doing God's work, doing divine work. So that makes it much easier to understand we're doing everything for my sake, as he says here. So it's our attitude that has to change. You can still be working on a computer, you can be cooking, you can do cleaning, all these things that ashrams need, but it's not for you anymore. And that invokes in us the attitude of dedication or offering, like sacred offering. So we start thinking to ourselves like, I wonder what kind of actions Amma would like. What would make her happy? And what would she do and what would she avoid? So we start thinking like that when, the more our actions are for her, for God, the more we think about it, because I can't offer the wrong thing to her, right? I can't just go out and, people go to the bar and say, this is for you, Amma, or something like that. Or, I'm going to smoke a cigarette. I mean, nothing bad with smoking cigarettes, but it's hard to offer that to Amma, right? When you're doing it. So we want to offer, the good things that are not addictive and harmful for health and all that. So it comes down to the level of our actions. So that means that our devotion, when we make it easier and easier to practice, it comes into the level of karma yoga, basically. That's what it is. But there's a precondition here, which is that the actions should be for God. There's no allowance for personal desires, like I'll give half to Amma or half to God and I'll keep half. You've heard that joke probably, right? There were 3 guys bragging about how they donate so much money to God. And one guy says, I throw up all my money in the air and whatever, falls in this circle that I'm standing in, I donate that to God. And the second guy says, oh, that's nothing. He says, I throw it really high up in the sky, and everything that's inside the circle, I just keep it for myself. Everything else I give to the temple. And the other guy said, I don't have any circle. I throw up all my money, and I see, God, you can have as much as you want. And whatever he doesn't take, I take it home. Obviously, nobody's going to take it. So, in other words, he doesn't give anything. So selfishness cannot be offered. There's no space for our self-centered thoughts in this version of sadhana, devotional sadhana. We may benefit in some way, like indirectly, but that is the incidental prasad, you could, because we're making an offering of some kind, our time, money, energy. And then there's a prasad that comes from that. Maybe some benefit comes to me, but it's an incidental benefit, right? It's not the main thing. Just imagine we're going to do a puja and we do it for like 10 minutes and then we have like 5 gallons of prasad for each person, payasam, right? And that's all we're doing it for. That would be crazy, right? We wouldn't even call it a puja. So like that, the offering is supposed to be the main part, not what we get back. But the problem is in today's society, the offering is very meager, and we all want a big paisam, a big bowl of pudding afterwards. We want a lot of benefits for ourselves. So we don't put that first, we don't even think about it. Then you get the ultimate prasad according to Krishna, which is, you shall attain perfection. Attaining perfection here means liberation. But like we said before, it can't possibly mean directly, because in other places he says that you have to go through a progression, and the other scriptures say that also. So we assume that it's indirectly. Well, otherwise we would all be realized, and we should be all realized by now if it's direct. So there's a progression, and Shankaracharya says we will achieve perfection through mental purification and attainment of what he calls yoga jnana, which is what Amma calls in Malayalam tattvatile bhakti. It means devotion based on spiritual principles. So he says we get mental purification first, then we understand the basic principles behind devotion, and then maybe a couple more steps in between, and then moksha. So this is the fourth sadhana he offers here, and it is often called Ishvara Arpana Buddhi. Ishvara Arpana Buddhi just means the mind, or the mindset of offering everything to God. So we've called it Yajna Bhava here. We had a retreat once on that, and it comes up in the Gita in earlier chapters. Yajna Bhava means the spirit of sacred offering, you could say. So that's basically what he's talking about. But Arjuna must have thought, this sounds really complicated. I don't know if I can do that. And omniscient Krishna is forced to offer one more last option, which we're going to hear in verse 11. Ataitad apyashaktosi kartum madyogamashritaha sarva karma palathyagam tata kuru yatatmavan. Again, a few changes here. I'll read a little bit differently. If you cannot do even this, in other words, my yoga, then taking refuge in me, which can also be translated as resorting to devotion to me, and subduing your mind and intellect, that feels a little bit too much. It's really closer to with self-restraint, or Shankaracharya says, with a disciplined mind. Abandon the fruit of all actions. So reading it through would be, if you cannot do even this, then resorting to devotion to me, and with self-restraint, abandon the fruit of all actions. So this is the last step in the progression that we're going to talk about today, at least. In the previous step, the difficulty was that only certain kinds of actions are allowed, only selfless dharmic actions, because they're being dedicated to God, and they have to be free from any personal desires of our own. So that means you can't do any homas for yourself, you can't pray for material success, you can't pray for anything for yourself, really. So in other words, even that fourth option requires quite a bit of detachment, non-attachment, dispassion, and you could also call it desirelessness. So how much of that can we tolerate, really? Some people may feel that they qualify, but when Amma comes, don't we all have questions for her? And aren't they rarely selfless ones? I'm not blaming anybody. It's not a criticism. It's just an observation. A lot of us, even I have questions for her. I mean, I like to think I'm doing Amma's work, but definitely there's a part of me in there that's saying, like, if I don't get an answer from Amma, there's going to be a big hassle for me. So I want to get answers. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's completely natural. We just have to remember that it's not supposed to be there in that previous step of devotion he talked about. So I want to share a little bit of a humorous digression about these questions that come to Amma. And there's a moral at the end as well. So what I've observed over time is that there are three basic categories of questions that come to Amma, during darshan particularly. These categories are like relationships, not just romantic ones, but all kinds of human interactions. Could be family members, it could be your next door neighbor, it could be your partner or whatever, or your children, parents, etc. The next category, number 2, is work, which always ties in with money, of course, cash flow, how to make a living, how to survive, all that. Investments, some people, actually one lady came with a question saying, tell me where to buy my lottery ticket so I'll win $1 million, you know. So that's one of those kind of money, work questions, right? And then the third category is health. So these are the three main, they cover a huge percentage of the questions that come. And then for each category, I've noticed there are 2 basic types. And I have to use some spiritual jargon to explain these. There's a concept of yoga and V-yoga. Yoga, as some of you may know, means the union of 2 things, right? So it means, so when we say yoga, it's like, I don't have good health now. I want yoga to come. I want health to come to me. So that's yoga of health, right? Or I want a partner. So that's yoga. I want that partner to come in my life. I want a raise. So I want yoga with promotion. Like that. I want more money. So all that is, we want to bring something towards us, right? That's one type, one flavor of the relationship, work, or health questions. The other one is the opposite, V-yoga. It's like, get rid of it. You know, I have this son, he's living with me, and he's just bothering me, and he's not working, and he's 50 years old. It's about time he moved out, right? So I wanted my son to move out of the house, perhaps. Or, I have this job, I don't like it, I want another job. Or, I have this disease, I want it to be cured. So that's the V-yoga version of something we want it to go away from us. Or it can be dealing with something that has come into our life that we don't know how to deal with. Or it can be, maybe we lose something in life and it makes us sad. So those are other possibilities. So when over time watching the same categories of questions come to Amma, I thought, just jokingly, we could have these because to save Amma's time, they come with the same questions and Amma answers them as though she's never answered that question before. And so patiently, and she spends so much time with everybody. And people go home very happy, of course, because she's showing affection to them. But probably because of my impatience, I thought of this system where we could have, if it's relationships, we'll call it 1. And if it's work or money, we'll call it 2. And if it's health, we'll call it 3. And then the yoga one, bringing it, is A, and there's going away is B. So the person comes up and I say to Amma, so I just heard she told me her problem. It's, I listened for, it was 10 minutes, and it's a 1B. And I'm 1B. Oh, my darling daughter, I'm so sorry about that. Yeah, 1B is tough, but you'll get over it. Or then, okay, now his question is 3A. Oh, 3A, that's really tough, isn't it? Yeah, I feel so sorry for you, right? Because, it's just hard to have that, something coming into your life like that. So in my interest of shortening Amma's time, maybe make darshan end faster, and so that she can get some rest, it's just a joke. We're not going to actually do it. But what happens really is that the moral of the story, actually, the moral is that because Amma has so much compassion for everybody, she would never do that, because even though she's heard the same questions a million times, 30 million, 40 million times, she still shows the same amount of affection and love to each person who asks a question and needs help, because she knows that we need that personal interaction. She doesn't say, go meditate on the formless absolute, you'll get the answer, right? Because she knows we can't do that. So she has to come down to our level and go through that whole operation. So it's one more reason for us to be grateful to her. And coming back to the concept of doing work for God, or remembering God, so long as we have a lot of selfish desires, we can never fully dedicate our actions to God. We can only partially dedicate them. And that's probably what was bothering Arjuna too, because in the 3rd chapter even, he asks Krishna a question. What is it that impels a person to do the wrong thing, even involuntarily, as if driven by force? I think this question has probably occurred to a lot of us at one time or another. So Krishna's answer is really helpful for all of us. He says, it is desire, it is anger, born of rajas, like we said a little while ago, all-consuming and most evil. Know this to be the enemy here on earth. Wow. So if you think anybody is your enemy, nope. It's the rajas, it's that excessive activity going on in the mind. That is the real enemy. So don't blame it. We cannot blame it on anybody else. Due to that rajas in us, our selfish doesn't just go away. We have a lot of likes and dislikes, and that impact on our mind is there very deep in our subconscious. So let's say we say you're not going to get angry. We're just going to meditate and all this. The problem is that rajas that is there in us hides now deeper in us in a subtle form. And that obstructs our attempts at sadhana. So some forms of that rajas are so deep-rooted that we don't even want to get rid of them. They're so subconscious that we don't have the power to uproot them. That's our problem. So what are we supposed to do? One might ask. That's what this verse says. Continue the actions for your own benefit. Whatever you're doing, just keep doing that. But change one element of the whole process. When you receive the fruits of your efforts, don't think of it as your own. Think of it as coming from me. Think of it as my prasad, because that is the truth. Take it as prasad and give thanks. Like you symbolically offer something at the temple. You offer it there, and then the priest or whoever it is gives it back to you. Like you bring something to Amma. You got something at the bookstore. You want her to bless it. She blesses it and gives it back to you, right? So you get it back, but now it's blessed. So you go, like say you have a baby and you want it to be blessed. You give it to Amma and you want it back, right? You're not going to say, Amma, you're going to raise this child for me, right? You might want to say, here, take my husband, take my wife. No, keep him, keep her. I don't want him back. So with other things, we want them back. So anyhow, if it is Gita class, Archana, or mother's kitchen, we don't expect any personal benefit on the material level, because we understand Amma's told us so many times to do these things. We know it's good for the world and for spirituality. So we don't have any material expectations from it. So we can really do it with the attitude that it's a sacred offering. The difficult part is to maintain that same attitude in your daily life. All the things you do all the time. Can we do those as though they're a sacred offering? Just imagine you're talking with your boss or your kid's teacher, or you called the tech support to get some help for your computer. These are all for your own benefit. You're talking with the bank. hey, what happened? Something wrong with my account. I can't get on I can't log into my account or something like that. So these are all, very clearly for our benefit. Now, how do we have that same attitude as we have during our sadhana while doing these things? So let's say you're talking on the phone. It's the same mouth uttering the same sound, right? Different words, but it's still sound, still the mouth. But we struggle to have the same attitude as we do when we chant archana. Chanting archana, it's the same mouth uttering sounds. On the phone talking with somebody, same mouth talking. The problem is that when we do these other activities, there's a very subtle thought on our mind that says, this is for me. It's there on a very deep level. I need this. This is for me. I have to get this done for me. So we need to cultivate more awareness. As Amma says, she's always said, Shraddha, Shraddha, Shraddha is everything. Not that I have it. I'm just noting that if we can catch that thought and change it to, come what may, I will accept it as your prasad. So not, I have to do this for me, but I'm going to, you're doing this, Amma, or I'm doing it for you, whatever it is. The outcome, I'm just going to accept it, whatever it is, because it's your prasad. Then there's no such thing as a bad outcome. Everything is a good outcome, because everything is prasad. So that is why this attitude is often called prasada buddhi. It means the attitude of receiving things as prasad. Everything. So it's the same principle, as when we offer food to Amma. You cook something at home. A lot of people offer some of the food at home to Amma before they eat it. So when they cook, it's not like they know they're going to go outside and give it to somebody. They know that they're the ones that are going to eat it. It's a self-centered action on the surface, right? But we still keep a plate in front of Amma, and we pray, and then we receive that food and eat it. It's the same plate, same food, same person eating it. So what's the difference, one might ask? Amma doesn't need that food, right? So the benefit is for us, and our attitude, our bhava, our sankalpa, our resolve, that's what changes the food. That's what changes the outcome. That's all Amma wants, our mind, our heart. That's why she tells this story about a devotee who, he used to love to do puja. And he would do puja over and over again to his beloved deity, just pretend it's your beloved deity. And then he cried so many times saying, God, you must show me your form, show me your form. And the deity, he heard a voice inside that says, I will show you my form, but you should bring me one flower, a particular flower. And he says, okay, I'll get 1,000,000 of them. What are they? He was a wealthy man. And the deity, the voice said, I want the chitta pushpa. And he was like, where am I going to get that? So he ran all around, he traveled all over the world. He spent years trying to find the chitta pushpa, and he came back empty-handed. He couldn't find it. And then he sat in front of his altar, and he prayed to his beloved deity, Oh Lord, I checked everywhere, all over the world. I spent so much time and energy trying to find that chitta pushpa for you. I could not find it. So all I can do is offer you my heart and constant remembrance of you. And at that moment, the deity manifested before him and said, that is chitta pushpa. Surrendering your heart. Because chitta means the mind. So when you offer your mind as a flower at the feet of your beloved deity, that is all Amma wants. I know that. When we read the Sanskrit, you might have heard the word tyaga. So those of you who know a little bit of the jargon would know that typically means renunciation. Don't get afraid, because Shankaracharya says that the interpretation is actually, it means a sense of surrender to God. Just a sense of surrender. Jnanadev says, there should be no notion that I should be remembered or that the actions have been done by me. Don't have any notion like that. That is what he means by tyaga. You're dedicating it. You're offering it without any attachment. That's what it is. So whatever comes back, fine. Then what happens? When we start accepting all outcomes as Amma's prasad, the mind gets purified. There's less reactions. The impurity in within us is all these, violent emotions that we have. Very extreme anger, extreme, disappointment, extreme, dolor, sadness, frustration, all these fear. These are the only impurities that we have within us. They're all products of the mind. So if you can accept everything as Amma's prasad, then the reactions are much less. You say, oh, okay, fine. I was ready for whatever came because it was Amma's prasad. So you don't get angry, you don't get afraid. All those negative tendencies, the negative emotions subside little by little. And then we have less desires too, because you're not expecting the outcome, you just try as best as you can, and whatever happens, that's good enough, the outcome. So, and then when you have less desires in the mind, it creates less desire-based actions, right? Because desire-based actions are part of that endless cycle of, expectation, upset, all that. Disappointment, anger, fear. So that we can cut that cycle each time we reject self-centered actions. So it's like going to the gym. You go to the gym and you work off some fat, and then to the degree you work it off, you can work out even more. So the more we do it, it's like a cumulative effect. So it's very powerful. So these are the 5 sadhanas that he's been talking about. We'll go over them again at the end. And if we look at those 5 sadhanas from the bottom now, he started from the top and came to the bottom. Let's say, well, that's where we are. We're at the bottom, right? So let's say I'm looking up now. I want to use this as a stairway to climb to Amma's supreme state. So Jnanadev even talks about it in that context, in that language. He says, one can reach the knowledge after ascending the steps in the form of the yoga of steady practice. So it's literally steps that we're climbing up to reach Amma. So now starting from the lowest rung on the ladder, so to speak, it's prasada buddhi, which means the attitude of accepting all outcomes as Amma's prasad. And then from there we move on to offering all our activities, all of our actions to her. The next one was repeated practice, meditating on our beloved deity, Ishtadevata. He calls it Abhyasa Yoga here, or the yoga of constant practice. And then the next, that's the third, right? 4th is devotion for the universal form. And 5th is devotion and meditation on the formless. So, like we talked about in the beginning of the chapter, the first class we had since I got back, second class we had since I got back. This progression shows that bhakti, devotion, is not just one particular sadhana. It's a series of sadhanas that take us from the you are here to you art that. Right? You are Brahman. And we have one more verse tonight, which will hopefully encourage us to dedicate ourselves to that 5th, at least to that 5th option, which is the first step of the staircase. Verse 12. In this verse, there's one place, since we're going to read it slowly, there's one place where I have to substitute a T for a J. So when you look on the screen, you're going to see Abhyasaj we're going to pronounce it abhyasat, because when you cut it, when you break it there, you need to do that. It's easier. Shreyo hi jnanam abhyasat jnanadhyanam vishishyate dhyanat karma phalastyaga tyagachantir anantaram. And how I've rendered it here is, better indeed is knowledge than mere practice, which is same thing as abhyasa. So better indeed is knowledge than mere practice. Meditation with knowledge is more esteemed, I think we can say, is preferred, is superior, or is better than mere knowledge. Better than meditation is the renunciation of the fruit of action for peace. For peace immediately follows renunciation. So I'll read it through one more time. Better indeed is knowledge than mere practice. Meditation with knowledge is superior than mere knowledge. Better than meditation is the renunciation of the fruit of action, for peace immediately follows renunciation. After reading this far, the majority of people will probably feel that the fifth option is hard enough for now. It's enough of a challenge. An honest person will really have to admit that their mind is full of too many self-centered desires to attempt more difficult sadhanas. You can, of course, you can, and I'm sure some people will be able to do that. But Krishna is talking to Arjuna, who is like your average person, and so we're going to go with that also here. We're going to assume that we're all kind of average. So some people will be contented with just that, they're happy to have a route map that shows them how to get from here to God. That's good enough for me. I'm going to start here and I'll move on as and when I'm ready. But there might be other people who feel discouraged in their attempts to practice other sadhanas, more difficult sadhanas, and they might even feel it's hopeless. Any one of us could feel like that at some time. So that's why Krishna has to give Arjuna, and all of us too, some hope. Amma does the same thing. She gives us all hope, even though maybe we don't really perform very well. And I'm going to share a little story about that. It was either 2019 or 2018, I can't remember. Amma was here in Chicago Ashram. And usually during Devi Bhava, I joined the local satsang members and bhajan team in singing maybe half an hour, 40 minutes of bhajans. And I want to leave time for them, so I don't have a very long session. But because it's the last day of the tour, and this is where I get involved the most, I was outdoors and it was cold, so I had this upper respiratory infection that was coming. My voice was so scratchy. And I sang a few songs and I turned around and I said, look, I can't sing all the songs I was supposed to sing. My throat is so messed up. I'm just going to sing this last song and end. And that last song, I forgot, had a high part at the end. And then I couldn't finish the song without singing the high part. So I tried to sing that high part and my voice just completely conked out and it wouldn't even reach that note. So it sounded really bad. And then afterwards I thought, whatever, maybe I was trying to remove my pride and the fear of being embarrassed in front of other people. So just I forgot about it. But it was so funny because the next time I saw Amma was in Japan. It was probably 2019. So she went to Toronto, and I had to rush to Japan the very next day because she was coming there. And this upper respiratory infection got even worse by the time Amma came. So I sounded like, if you're my age, you might know the Little Rascals. There's this guy named Froggy. He's always talking a very low voice. So I sounded like that. And, after I did the morning meditation, led the morning meditation, Swamiji came up to me and he said, "What happened to your voice?" And Amma said, and I said, "I have a throat infection." And I said, "I can't sing or anything." And then Amma turned to me and she said, "No, you sang very well in Chicago." And I was like, "What?" She said, "No, that one place, you had you struggled a little bit, but at the end you got the right note. It was really good." And I was like, "Oh, come on, Amma, you don't have to go that far I know it was horrible." But anyhow, she wanted to give me some hope, right? So it was so funny that she went that far. Anyhow, here Krishna is glorifying that sadhana that he just talked about in verse 11. He wants us all to get excited about it, right? And it's dedicating the fruits of our actions to God. So even that requires effort, right? So just as Amma definitely exaggerated my singing a bit, Krishna is doing the same regarding this kind of sadhana with Arjuna. But it's okay to do that. A little exaggeration is needed. It's even dharmic because we need to have enthusiasm for the sadhana that suits us best, right? So it's like a motivational speech or pep talk, you could say. Spiritual pep talk from Krishna to Arjuna and all of us. So here he uses that word abhyasa. It can refer to pretty much any one of these techniques we talked about, repeated practice. But ideally, he's hoping that eventually we'll get to the universal form, fixing our mind on that. Because the next step is the formless. Except for us, when he's talking about the first part, he says, he says, better indeed is knowledge than mere practice. Mere practice means practicing any of these sadhanas without understanding of it. So it's mechanical. We lack deep understanding about that. So he starts from there. This is like level 1, you could say. In this verse, he's got different categories in different contexts. So this verse itself has 4 levels he's talking about. So you start from doing these repeated the yoga of repeated effort without any understanding. So it's better to know what you're doing than to just do it. So compared to the mechanical worship or the mechanical devotion, it's better to have knowledge of the principles behind devotion. Because a lot of people don't have that understanding at all. They have no grasp of what the scriptures or God realized beings say about God. And they may not even be interested in it. For them, what is needed is an additional depth, more depth of understanding about God. They don't need to do more mechanical pujas. They need to understand what God really means. And this is level 2, understanding God more than you do now. So next, better than just a mere understanding of God is to meditate with that understanding, right? So we went from mechanical to understanding and to meditating with understanding, or doing our spiritual practices with understanding. So that understanding could be that this whole universe is Amma's body, right? I think enough of people have heard this in the Gita course, the class, that they're starting to practice it in their lives. And even in the Vedas, Purusha Suktam, it talks about how this whole universe is permeated by God. And a lot of the scriptures use that analogy of gold and jewelry. So if you have jewelry in your hand, you don't have to ask where's the gold, right? Because the jewelry is gold. So we have this universe, this is God. That's the concept. So understanding that and practicing devotion is even better. So we can think of it as love that comes from a deeper understanding of God. Loving Amma is good, but loving Amma with a deeper understanding of who she really is even better. Without that, our devotion will be very fragile and our emotions will be very fragile. Amma, you didn't look at me. Didn't you? You had put like this weird face on when I went for darshan. I think she doesn't like me. I'm not going for darshan anymore. You know, anything can happen if we don't have a deeper understanding of who Amma is. So this is level 3. It's meditation with knowledge, which is better because the seeker tries to assimilate all these things that he understands intellectually. He's trying to assimilate them through sadhana. So then Krishna has one more level, he adds to that. Better than meditation with understanding is relinquishing the fruits of all your actions. That's kind of a strange progression, isn't it? Because it was supposed to be the last. It's supposed to be like the first step to climb up. You know, so suddenly he's calling it the highest. And in the verse before, in the verse before, verse 11, he says, if you cannot do anything else, just do this, right? Which it's like the last resort. You know, if you're that hopeless, then just do this. So he just said that, and now he says this is the best. So we have to kind of be a little realistic about what he means there. We can infer that he is glorifying it for our sake and Arjuna's sake. It's like Amma might say to me, you know what the best thing is to do? Is to don't sing when you have an upper respiratory infection or avoid getting an upper respiratory infection. That's not the best thing, actually. You know, singing beautifully is the right thing. But what I needed to know at that time was a different solution. So whatever is important for us now, they're going to say that's the best because that's what we need. So all of the Sahasranamas have these stuti vakyam, like a praise of their benefits. It's like phalastuti, they call it. Phalastuti, which means praising the results of it, the benefit of it. And if you read that description of what you get from Lalita Sahasranama, even a businessman or like a really greedy person will say, I'm going to start chanting this today, because it promises you so many things, right? But, it doesn't mean we're guaranteed to receive them, right? It depends on the rest of our life. You can't be a really selfish person and just chant Sahasranama once and expect to get something from it, right? So maybe it brings those benefits indirectly, not directly, or maybe conditional on other things. But, it still talks about it as being the best. All the Sahasranamas, they have these explanations to say it's the best. So we should also think of Krishna's words, look at them in that light. Otherwise, he's contradicting himself, right? Because the previous verse said something different. So what is this promise that he makes, that the fifth step is so special? He says, immediate peace of mind. It gives immediate peace of mind. Who doesn't want immediate peace of mind? And that is not an exaggeration either, I can tell you, because tyaga, or, tyaga just means letting go, right? To let it go. So, in general, tyaga is the solution to peace of mind for everybody, any time. The mind experiences pain and sorrow only when it can't let go of something. So letting go of our attachments enables us to accept both yoga and viyoga. Remember, yoga was something coming to you and something going away. Letting go of our attachments enables us to accept both yoga and viyoga happily. So even as a general statement, yes, we can say tyaga brings about peace of mind. Secondly, from the spiritual standpoint, the definition of a peaceful mind is one that can accept all circumstances. Come what may, I'll be peaceful. That's what Amma says, I'll be happy. And that is exactly what prasada buddhi means. It means an attitude that can accept everything. Success and failure are not determined by the tangible outcome, but rather by the internal outcome. Accepting it all as God's, Amma's prasad. So acceptance of all that comes to us in life is the key to spiritual growth. And spiritual growth is the greatest success we could ever wish for. How many people we know that, have a lot of things in life, but they can't enjoy them because they don't have that spiritual maturity. Without that, we can't enjoy anything that comes to us in life, no matter how hard we strive to get it. And Shankaracharya's point here, I really like how he puts it. He says, by surrendering the fruits of our actions, we experience peace now, not postponing it to a later time. Who wants it later when you can have it right now, right? So letting go enables you to have peace now. That's why he's saying, just focus on this. And if you get that down, you'll move on to the next step automatically. And with this, Lord Krishna concludes his high-level explanation of this 5 steps of Bhakti Yoga. Don't confuse that with the 11 levels of devotion mentioned in Narada Bhakti Sutras. It's totally different. This is just within this context. He's telling Arjuna and indirectly us that you have these different steps. And that is, this concept of devotion is really the main theme of this chapter, and that's how it got its name, Bhakti Yoga. We'll have more on this topic next week. And for now, I'm going to use a few remaining minutes to respond to some questions that came up, were sent through the email address where we receive questions on this for this class. So here's one question that came. There were some that were just notes, or like some messages, from them, personal. But I'm just going to read the questions, okay? This person says, if I understood correctly, you've mentioned the mind as manas and buddhi, with the emotions interacting with the mind. I've learned the mind as the Antakarana, which we talked about a little while ago, with 4 functions, manas, buddhi, chitta, and ahamkara. I'm not going to repeat the definitions of those that this person has written because some of them are wrong. But they have the different descriptions of what they are. And there was no place for the emotions, though they do play an important role in taking decisions. Would you kindly elaborate on where the emotions fit in order to understand how to recognize them, especially in decision making, and have more control over them? Okay, I'll do my best here. I think actually a little bit of confusion is going on for this person. Maybe not grasping it properly. It sounds like different schools of thought are being mixed in a little bit. Because these Sanskrit words are used across a lot of different philosophical schools of philosophy. India alone has the 8 darshanas, they call it. 8 different types of philosophy, the primary ones. And so they all use these same Sanskrit words, but they will interpret them differently, like Patanjali and the Yoga Sutras interprets in one way. But this is Advaita Vedanta, okay? This is the core of Amma's teaching. So we're going to use those Sanskrit words the way she does. So that's one little statutory warning that I think that a little bit of confusion in the question to begin with. And Amma's flavor of Advaita Vedanta is the practical one. She says it has to be practical. Don't get too much in your head and then don't practice anything, right? It should be practical. So first, the mind. I think this is mostly about the mind and the emotions, so I'm going to focus on that with the limited time we have here. Understanding what the mind is. It is the flow of thoughts. That's how it was explained to me. Everything I'm sharing is just what I've understood. I may be wrong, of course. So mind is the flow of thoughts. That means it's constantly moving, right? So it's like a river. If you point over and there's the river and there's no water in it, well then it's not a river, right? So river implies the water's constantly flowing. Mind implies that there's constantly thoughts flowing. So what's a thought? So a thought is defined, how I learned, was thought is defined as consciousness plus an object. That's one thought. So that thought could be a word, idea in my mind that I'm speaking now, or someone you're looking at, or what you're eating. You're focusing on the food, and your eyes are seeing something, your tongue is tasting something. These are all objects. So you're thinking about those things as you eat them, right? So it's a flow of consciousness that is jumping from object to object. That's the mind. And the intellect is the viveka function. So it means it is the power of discernment in us. It can compare things, it can evaluate things, it can judge what is dharmic, what is adharmic, what is good, what is bad, what is just, what is unjust, etc. So you would think that the mind, and the mind is tied to the sense organs. That's another thing. It's another subject. We won't go into that. But so what happens is that the sensory information comes through the sense organs and imprints itself on the mind, and the mind relays that information to the intellect. Just think of it as like an office, or like the, investigation team, on the field. They report it to the manager or whoever. And the problem is that the mind, is supposed to be neutral. And inherently it is. But there's also a layer of vasanas in between. There's a layer of likes and dislikes in between the mind and the intellect. So when the mind relays that sensory information to the intellect, in between it gets distorted by the vasanas. So we have convex and concave lenses, right? Trying to remember which one. I think concave makes it look smaller, and convex makes it look bigger, right? So your likes are convex lens, and your dislikes are a concave lens. So let's say, everything is supposed to be equal in the world. Everything is supposed to be God. So, a long time ago, we had a class here, and there was a young boy in the class, and I said, "Tell me, what's your favorite food?" And I think he said it was chocolate, or what was it? I don't remember what it was. It was something that he really liked. Maybe ice cream, let's say ice cream. And I said, okay, so, which one is more important, ice cream or, and I named something else, probably homework or something like that. And, which one does the mind tell you is more important? Of course, ice cream is more important, right? So that means that even though homework is actually really important, the convex lens is making the ice cream look really important, and the concave lens is making homework really unimportant. And so by the time the data or the information reaches the intellect, it's poorly equipped to make the right decision. So that's why we make wrong decisions, because our vasanas interfere, and it's like political, biases in the media. They make one story that, promotes the party they like. They make that sound like, hey, this is a wonderful job that they just did. And then the other, media outlet is with the other party, and they want to make that look unimportant. And then their favorite politician, they go, oh, he did the great thing. She's great. She's always doing the right thing. So the media can change it just like that. The vasanas are like that. They blow things up or shrink it as they prefer. So we cannot be swayed by that. And the only way to do that, to avoid that, is to, first of all, know what your vasanas are, understand your own mind, and also gradually curb it through denial, basically. You have to do some kind of vratam, or do some kind of small vow, like I'm not going to have ice cream tonight, or I'll have half the size that I have, or at least I'll offer it to Amma and then eat it, like he's saying. So there's little things to reduce the, if we give full license to it, then, it's just going to get worse. So we have to slowly keep it on a short leash. And then the vasanas gradually decrease. And you find that your judgment capacity improves a lot. Your ability to discern right from wrong improves a lot when you reduce the vasana. So sometimes you have to make yourself do the thing that the mind doesn't want to do, just to reduce that vasana. So the emotions that we experience through all these kind of through all these kind of situations is also due to the vasanas. So all of our emotions are negative reactions, or our strong desires. All these are from the vasanas trying to push us to do things or not do something else. So we have to understand where it's coming from, and then say, well, forget about that. What would Amma want me to do? What's best, not just for me, but for everybody? What is best according to, a universal scale? What if everybody did this? Would it be okay, or would it be harmful? So we have to think about it in that way. The maximum good for the maximum number of people for the maximum amount of time. That is a good benchmark. And that word chitta was not properly translated. It's not awareness. It is actually memory. According to Vedanta, it's the subconscious mind. It's the storehouse of memory. Chit is awareness. Chit is consciousness. So I think there's a little bit of confusion involved there. Ahamkara is, yes, it is the ego. It means the feeling I. And there's only one other question tonight, which was about the previous classes. And they're not listed on YouTube. I don't want them to be listed. Not a big fan of having them out there for a long time. But people who are listening, you can request it. You can send us an email to that address, and we will give you access to the unlisted videos so you can see them. Just have to request it. Okay. So more to come next week. And we will close for now by chanting Asatoma and Loka Samasta. This is the preliminary conclusion. It goes on a little bit longer for those who care to stay and meditate to assimilate these teachings. So we'll begin with Asatoma. Take a deep breath. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. As we chant Loka Samasta, we'll do it 9 times and visualize the white flowers of peace showering from all over the sky upon the entire earth, incessantly coming down from the sky and also upon your own head. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. 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 Lokaha samastaha sukhino bhavantu lokaha samastaha sukhino bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Now let us take a few moments to meditate and try to absorb the teachings we have heard from the Gita, which is none other than Amma's teaching. We know that Amma is the same pure consciousness that flowed through Lord Krishna thousands of years ago. So close your eyes, check your posture, try to keep your spine and neck relatively straight. Take a few long, deep breaths. And with each long inhalation and exhalation, feel your body and mind relaxing further and further. Feel a powerful spiritual presence all around you. Permeating even within you. And feel Amma shining in your heart. Let us go a little deeper by focusing on the rhythmic flow of our breathing process. Breathe with full awareness. Be fully conscious of each and every inhalation and exhalation. When we focus our awareness on the breathing process in this way, the mind becomes more subtle, and we are able to visualize more easily. Let us now rewind the tape of the day. Reflect on some of the main actions, activities of the day for you. Some of them might have been clearly spiritual, others not. Some actions might have come from selfless motivation, some not. With the ones that are pure, intended, with selfless motives, imagine yourself doing that as an offering to Amma. And for any other action, imagine yourself in your mind's eye, see yourself saying to Amma, I'm going to do this now. I accept the outcome as your prasad, no matter what it may be. Either way, there's a way for us to surrender all of our actions to Amma in one way or another. So remember some things you did today and mentally use one of these techniques to offer it or surrender to Amma. And as you surrender or offer your actions to Amma, try to see her face smiling, that radiant face of hers, with the twinkling in her eyes. Just that act of offering our activities or receiving the result as her prasadam can make us feel like we had darshan. The blissful remembrance of her. We're enveloped in her arms. And she receives that offering with great joy. Now we'll conclude with one final mantra, Purnamada. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes. Om Namah Shivaya. And hope to see you in a couple of days on Saturday for satsang and Gita class next week also. Namah Shivaya.